Is green energy to blame for the massive power outage in Texas? Hi, Dave here from Informed American. I hope you're all having a great day, and I hope you are all keeping warm here in the Tampa area. I'm fortunate enough to have the temperatures in the low 60s today, so thankfully I am out of the cold, but I know many of you are not, and I want you to share your experience of what's going on in your area if you are or know someone who's affected in the Texas area or even much of the country with this deep freeze that's been going on. And so many people have been out of power. I want to get right to this map here. 4.4 million people out of power, and you can see in the Houston area down there in the southeast, and then in the Texas, and then the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In fact, my brother-in-law lives in a Fort Worth suburb. He's been out of power for 2 days now. Temperatures in his home got to under 40 degrees. I mean, absolutely brutal conditions, and of course, this is all over the news. And yeah, I want to know if you're in Texas, if you're dealing with this right now, if you're out of power, or if you know someone who is. What do you do? I mean, I guess at this point, the only thing you can do if you don't have a fireplace and you have no power, hopefully you have enough candles, and you're just bundled up. Maybe you go in your car and turn on the heat. If that thing will start, unbelievable. Temperatures in his area got to, I believe, 13 or 14 degrees outside and under 40 degrees inside. Oh, man, absolutely miserable. But I want to start, as I pose the question, is green energy to blame? Why did I ask this question? And I want to know your thoughts on this as I go through. Wind turbines are freezing in Texas among unprecedented storms. This comes from the UK Independent. Frozen wind turbines have caused almost half of Texas wind generation's capacity to go offline amidst the unprecedented storm. The Lone Star State's under a state of emergency. Now here, they're already behind here. They're saying 3 million people, and now we're up, as I just showed you, we're at 4.4 million people. Says Texas wind farms typically generate a total of 25,100 megawatts of energy. The Austin American Statesman reported on Sunday turbines accounted for 12,000 megawatts had iced over. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, manages the state's power grid, confirmed. And this says how they typically don't really operate that much in winter, but wind turbines accounted for almost a quarter of Texas's energy output in 2020, making it the second largest power source after natural gas. And I believe Texas leads the country in wind power, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it says turbines can be equipped with packages that allow them to continue working in freezing temperatures. However, modifications are costly, according to Wind Power Engineering, and therefore seldom made in locations where they are unlikely to be needed. But it looks like you needed it in Texas, didn't you? And this is part of maybe a larger conversation. It is unusual for Texas to be getting these kinds of frozen temperatures. It's not uncommon for it to get cold in Texas, but this sort of prolonged, ridiculous level of cold, and that remains, that's sort of an outstanding question of how we assess risk for the maybe the unlikely event. These things will now. As it mentions here, de-icing for wind turbines. Well, in Texas, it's not a big deal until it is, right? And Rodney Johnson, the editor of Informed American, he told me he had a stat here. Let me just pull this up. In terms of total generation of power, Rodney says what they aren't widely reporting is that 34,000 megawatts that went offline. Of that 34,000 megawatts that went offline, 28,000 was wind. And it caused a collapse in the system. This is continuing here in this article. Frozen turbines have hampered the state's power generation at a time when Texas is experiencing record demand due to heavy snowfall and extreme low temperatures. Now, if we live in a warm climate like I do, like Texas generally is, the power grid is basically set to run not so strongly in winter. They don't typically need to generate as much in winter. It's really set to generate the most when people are cranking up the air conditioners in the hot summer. And when people do need to heat their homes in places like, say, here in Florida or in places like Texas, you don't really have the equipment in your home to heat your house properly. Not everybody, if you have a central AC system, not everybody has a heat pump. And the colder it gets, a heat pump gets less and less efficient to the point where it doesn't work. How many people have furnaces in Texas? Probably not that many. So a lot of people may just be relying on electric heat, which is very, very inefficient and costly. So you had everybody trying to turn up the thermostats. We had a freeze over in the equipment. And Texas, they started, well, we're going to, as my brother-in-law said, I believe he got a message from his power company saying, well, we're going to be doing some sort of rolling blackouts. Maybe every 2 hours, we'll have to turn it back on and off. He said it went off once, and it still hasn't come back on. Now, I asked you about wind power because this has been the push for wind power. But the thing is, if you want to, and I think wind turbines are gonna get a lot of the blame here. I'm sure you've seen that, but it's not just wind, the wind powers that iced over. Natural gas, same thing. In fact, they had to shut down plants all over the place as these power plants require water to operate, and the temperature was so cold that water intake froze. So the same thing happened with coal. The same thing happened with natural gas, and I believe they even shut down a nuclear power plant. So that's sort of the issue, right? Now it says natural gas plants. This is sort of the energy breakdown in Texas. Natural gas is 40%, wind turbines second at 23%, coal at 18%, and nuclear at 11%. So everything froze. So it's not just the wind turbines. Everything froze. And up the line for natural gas, wellheads and pipes were frozen. You need water to run this stuff, and they're not well enough insulated. So that does create a problem. And that's really, so to answer my own question, no, green energy did not cause this. Texas was not prepared for this. And really the question is, should they have been? This is an event that probably happens, an event like we're seeing right now, happens every 30 to 40 years. And these things are costly. So what do you do? We all play the percentages in our lives, the unlikely event, but when it happens, it's pretty stinking bad. And you got people freezing basically in their homes, and there's no solution right now until it warms up, basically. And here is some of the solutions. And if you're living in Texas, this is probably coming because people will not accept this. Even if they know that this isn't going to happen again for 30 or 40 years, they do not want this to happen ever again. So what is Texas up against? This one comes from WFAA, a local affiliate of ABC in Texas. Texas power outages, how the largest energy-producing state in the U.S. failed in freezing temperatures. Here it comes. There are things that can be done, but it will cost money. This comes from a professor from UT Austin. As many Texans are rightfully asking why the largest energy-producing state in the country cannot produce enough energy to get through the week of below freezing temperatures. So what happened? Equipment failure turned out to be a big problem. Beginning at 11 p.m. Sunday night, multiple generating units began tripping offline and began a rapid progression due to severe cold weather. What does this mean? Equipment literally froze in the single-digit temperatures and stopped working. So everything's frozen up, you can't run anything, and you just have to shut it all down. Now, I haven't found out exactly why the nuclear power plant was turned down. That may have just been a safety precaution or something to do with maybe there was a water thing too, that they were getting pipes and those were frozen as well. And of course you need to cool the reactor. So it says, here's really the money here. The money shot exactly. Here are things that can be done, but it will cost some money. About every decade we have these long sustained periods, and then, weatherization is supposed to happen, and then it doesn't because it costs money. ERCOT said that almost 34,000 megawatts of electricity has been forced off the system. And it's getting higher and higher, as we say. And I've got that figure from Rodney as well. And of course, some of these news articles are about 1 million people behind in terms of who's lost power. It says this isn't the first time that weatherization has been an issue with equipment failure and rotating outages in Texas. In August 2011, 6 months after an ice storm crippled most of the state, resulting in rotating outages, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and they came up with a report with recommendations. Generators and natural gas producers suffered severe losses of capacity despite having received accurate forecasts of the storm. Entities in both categories report having weatherization procedures in place. However, the poor performance of many of these generating units as well suggests that these procedures were either inadequate or not adequately followed. And it goes back to saying this also happened in 1989. The experiences in 1989 are instructive, particularly on the electric side that year. And in 2011, cold weather caused many generators to trip, derail, or fail to start. They investigated the occurrence and issued a number of recommendations aimed at improving weatherization. These recommendations were not mandatory. Over the course of the time, implementation lapsed. Many of the generators that experienced outages in 1989 failed again in 2011. And now it remains to be seen what comes out of this. Did those same generators fail again here in 2021? Winterizing equipment, making sure it can sustain extended periods of below freezing temperatures, has never been a requirement in Texas like in other states. Now, we're curious, I don't know if those are required here in Florida. It'd be interesting to hear. Maybe in northern Florida you need them more than down here. But hey, as I said, these things, eventually they will happen. And maybe a little bit of cost in weatherizing ahead of time can save this kind of a nightmare. All of us would love to say we want super reliable electricity. It would be millions to really bulletproof the system for that. How much do we want to pay to protect ourselves with insurance policies for rare events? And that was the question I posed to all of you. There's the quote here. Is it worth it? If you live in Texas, would it have been worth it? I would guess you might say yes, even if it meant a little bit higher electricity bill cost passed down to you. I would say right now, if you're sitting in your home and it's 40 degrees, you'd say, yeah, I would have liked to maybe pay a little bit over the last few years so that I'm not sitting in my home and freezing right now. It's a fair point. Rotating outages are rare in Texas and only happen about every decade or so. But in dangerous cold, much of what has enveloped the state this week, lives can be put at risk since many people are trapped at home, unable to leave because of treacherous travel conditions, not to mention some older individuals live in poorly insulated homes. Texas lawmakers are asking questions again. Now, Governor Abbott has said the Texas power grid has not been compromised. The ability of some companies that generate the power has been frozen. This includes natural gas and coal generators. They are working to get generation back online. So as I said, well, there's two things here. One, I think if your system is frozen, I think that qualifies as compromised. That might just be me. I think that's fair enough to say it's been compromised. If it will not run because everything's frozen. As I mentioned, I was searching around for nuclear, and I haven't really been able to find a good answer on that. Maybe that detail will be forthcoming here. Governor Abbott mentions natural gas and coal. As I mentioned, I did notice that at least one nuclear power generator in Texas has been shut down, and I'm not sure why. It could have also been maybe a water thing as well. As it manages, now ERCOT defends their winter plan
in my life. Scrambling in the snow.
It's been out since. Turn that off. It's coming up. This event was well beyond the design parameters for a typical or even extreme Texas winter that you would plan for. They began as rotating outages, but now they're controlled outages and lasting longer than would normally happen of this magnitude. But history says that Texas should. This is how the article concludes. But history says Texas should have known better. What's the price we're willing to pay? And I think this is a really good article laying that out. It's going to cost a lot. And look, the cost of retrofitting this stuff, it's a lot better to do it at the beginning, right? Trying to retrofit this stuff is going to cost a bundle. And now you have all these wind. As I mentioned, Texas, I believe, leads the United States in wind power generation. You have all these wind turbines out there. Are you going to retrofit all of them so that they don't ice over? And now you got to go to your natural gas plants and your coal plants and potentially your nuclear power plant and retrofit everything so it doesn't freeze? Is it worth the cost? I want to know your thought on that. Or do you just say, hey, this happens every 10, 20 years, and what are you going to do about it? I mean, that seems to be ERCOT's position, that we did everything we could, but it's just too damn cold. And now we got to shut everything down. And we're not, and hopefully when this thing thaws out, we'll be back to normal. And they will. But I don't expect this to go away. And particularly for those of you affected by this, I want to know what you think, or if you're out there just generally. I mean, could Texas have prepared for this better? Now, I did look into de-icing wind turbines, and it can be done. It is costly, but wind turbines do operate in northern climates. I believe Sweden is also expanding crazy with wind turbines, and they have to deal with de-icing. There's a lot of different technologies you can see. You may have seen the meme going around, which essentially is a helicopter flying above the wind turbine, spraying it with some de-icing stuff. And many criticizing that, seeming a little bit silly that you have to do all this just to get the thing to run. But while we're on the topic, and I was thinking of nuclear, and I haven't really found a good. If you know why the nuclear power plants had to shut down, I'd like to know why. Maybe it simply is the frozen water issue in its supply. But if you have that, I'd like to know. But I did have this here. This comes from our own government, Office of Nuclear Energy. When you hear the words clean energy, what comes to mind? Because here we are on a topic of criticizing wind turbines, stuff like that, and that's going to be a big thing going on. What about nuclear power? Don't really hear about it that much. Many people immediately think of solar panels or wind turbines, but how many of you thought of nuclear energy? Nuclear energy is often left out of the clean energy conversation, despite it being the largest source of low-carbon electricity in the world behind hydropower. Just how clean and sustainable is nuclear? Try these facts for quick starters. Nuclear energy protects air quality. Nuclear energy is a zero-emission clean energy source. It generates enough power through fission, which is the process of splitting uranium atoms to produce energy. It basically creates steam. It says, according to the Nuclear Energy Institute, the U.S. avoided more than 476 metric tons of carbon dioxide in 2019. That's the equivalent of removing 100 million cars from the road, and more than all the other clean energy sources combined. This comes just from nuclear. It also keeps the air clean by removing thousands of harmful air pollutants each year that contribute to acid rain, smog, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease. Nuclear energy's land footprint is small. Now you see this solar power farm, that's taking up a lot of space. Those wind turbines, they have to be spread out all over the place. Texas is a good spot because it's flat and it gets a lot of wind, but despite massive amounts of carbon-free power, nuclear energy produces more electricity on less land than any clean air source. It says it requires a little more than 1 square mile to operate. Wind farms typically require 360 times more land area to produce the same amount of electricity. So you got 1 square mile versus 360 square miles. Put that in perspective, you need 3 million solar panels to produce the same amount of power as a typical commercial reactor, or more than 430 wind turbines. In 430 wind turbines, you don't have to worry about de-icing and having a helicopter or a drone spray some chemical on them so that they don't freeze over and stop working. Now, this one might be controversial. Nuclear energy produces minimal waste. Nuclear fuel is extremely dense, about 1 million times greater than that of traditional energy sources, and because of this, the amount of used nuclear energy fuel is not as big as you might think. All the used nuclear energy fuel produced by the U.S. nuclear energy industry over the last 60 years could fit in a football field at a depth of less than 10 yards. That waste can also be reprocessed and recycled, although the U.S. currently does not do this. However, some advanced reactor designs being developed could operate on used fuel. The NICE Future Initiative is a global effort under Clean Energy Ministry. It gives nuclear, basically just saying, okay, that's the conclusion. But how about nuclear? You never hear too much about nuclear. Why don't we just build nuclear power plants? Now, certainly the fear of a meltdown remains high, I guess, but most nuclear plants have been essentially regulated out of business and the cost to operate them. But other than, I guess, a water line, as far as I'm speculating, there's really no environmental change. There's nothing really there with, can't freeze over, can't get too hot, at least in terms of it being hot outside, because you're cooling the reactor anyways. Don't hear too much about that. But now we got frozen wind turbines and frozen natural gas wells. Just don't hear enough about nuclear. But I wanted to bring this up because, look, you're going to hear a lot about wind turbines, and just ask. And it does at first glance seem like, geez, you know, the wind turbine. Now they did freeze over, and it was responsible for a lot of it. But we also have to keep in mind that it basically looks like a failure across the board of Texas Power. Things were not properly winterized, and they just could not run because it's too damn cold outside. So I want to know what you think about all of this. Should Texas insulate everything? Should they go back and retrofit? Is it worth the cost, or is this just sort of one of these sort of one-offs that happen every 10 years, every 20 years, and you basically power through it? And are you willing to pay? Question is, are you willing to pay, especially those of you in Texas, are you willing to pay a little bit more? Or if you're anywhere around the country where your power company has the opportunity to basically protect the grid from these mostly rare events like this, are you willing to pay a little bit more in your bill so that you're not stuck in your home under 40 degrees with no power for days? Want to know what you think about all of that? Go ahead and comment down below about this situation going on in Texas, the future of green energy. What do you think about nuclear power plants? Should we be building more, or are they too dangerous? Please comment down below. Let me know what you think. If you're watching here on Facebook, please hit the thumbs up button and share this video with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. We always want you to head on over to informedamerican.com. Sign up for our free newsletter where you can get real smart news. Thanks for watching.